The Chicago wind cut through my coat as if it wasn't there, finding the gaps in my scarf with cruel precision as I trudged up the cracked sidewalk to my apartment building. February had settled into the city with its usual gray malice, turning everything the color of old dishwater. My marketing specialist badge still hung around my neck, a laminated reminder that my 55th hour of work this week had finally ended. I should have been thinking about the presentation I'd nailed or the client email that praised my campaign strategy. Instead, all I could think about was collapsing on my second-hand couch and pretending the world didn't exist for a few precious hours. The security door of the complex clicked shut firmly behind a delivery driver who was just leaving. I reached for my fob, noting the handwritten sign taped to the glass. Security cameras under maintenance. Typical for the West Side. But at least the magnetic lock engaged with a reassuring thud, separating the chaos of the street from my small sanctuary. I stopped complaining about the building's quirks long ago. At 26 and pulling in $55,000 a year in one of America's most expensive cities, I'd learned to pick my battles. I believed the heavy steel door kept me safe. I didn't realize then that a locked door is only a deterrent to honest people, not to someone patient enough to wait for a careless neighbor to hold it open out of politeness. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, number 3C. The hallway always smelled like Mrs. Higgins's cooking from 3A, a mix of garlic and something vaguely floral that I'd never been able to identify. Today, though, something felt different. I slid my key into the deadbolt. It turned smoothly, the way it always did. No scratches around the lock, no signs of forced entry. The door swung open on hinges that needed oil, and I stepped inside. That's when I felt it. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and somehow know someone else has been there? It's not logical. It's not something you can point to and say, aha, evidence. It's deeper than that primal. A shift in the air, a disturbance in the energy of your private space. My $800 TV still sat on its cheap IKEA stand, the screen reflecting the fading afternoon light. My laptop remained on the kitchen counter where I'd left it that morning. Nothing was missing. Nothing was obviously wrong. But everything was wrong. I set my purse down slowly, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone. The photos on the shelf, the one of Hannah and me at her graduation, the one of Maya and me at that karaoke bar, they were angled differently, just slightly, as if someone had picked them up to look at them, then set them back down without paying attention to exactly how they'd been positioned. I moved toward the kitchen. The smell hit me then. Tomato sauce. Rich, seasoned, definitely homemade. But I hadn't cooked anything with tomato sauce in weeks. My fridge contained half a rotting bell pepper, some questionable milk, and a drawer full of takeout condiment packets. That was the reality of working 50-hour weeks on a survival wage. My heart started hammering against my ribs. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to call 911. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone had been in my space, touching my things, cooking in my kitchen. But then the other voice kicked in, the one I'd been training since childhood. The voice that said, "Don't make a scene. Don't overreact. Don't create drama where there might be a reasonable explanation." Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the photos had always been at that angle and I just hadn't noticed. Maybe the smell was drifting from a neighbor's apartment through the heating vents. Maybe I was losing my mind after another brutal week of deadline after deadline, of making $55,000 stretch across rent, utilities, student loans, and the basic human need to occasionally eat something that didn't come from a microwave. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me jump. A text message. From Mom. I stopped by to leave some food and see if my daughter is okay. Your fridge was too empty. The words on the screen blurred as my vision tunneled. My breath came shallow and fast. She was here. My mother had been in my apartment, walking through my rooms, opening my refrigerator, judging the contents of my life. Another text followed immediately. Used my spare key. Hope you don't mind. Love you. Hope I don't mind. The memory crashed over me like a wave, pulling me under. 2 years ago, moving day. I'd been so excited, so proud. My first apartment, my first real taste of independence after 4 years of college and 2 years of living at home while I saved up for a security deposit. Patricia Shepard, my mother, had helped me carry boxes up those 3 flights of stairs. She'd admired the space, even though it was tiny and the bathroom tiles were cracked and the bedroom window looked out onto a brick wall. She'd hugged me tight and told me how proud she was. And then, as she was leaving, she'd paused at the door. Honey, would you mind if I kept a spare key? You know, just for emergencies. What if you lock yourself out? Or what if there's a fire and you're not home and the firefighters need to get in? Or what if you get sick and I need to bring you soup? Her voice had been so reasonable, so maternal, so full of concern. I'd hesitated. Something in my gut had twisted, a warning I didn't understand. But how do you say no to your mother? How do you tell the woman who raised you that you don't trust her with access to your home? What kind of ungrateful daughter would that make me? So I'd said yes. I'd handed over that spare key with a smile, believing I was just being practical, believing that her controlling nature was just love manifesting in an overprotective way. I stood in my violated kitchen now, staring at that text message, and felt the fool I'd been. My hands shook as I pulled up her contact and hit the call button. It rang 3 times before she answered. Leah, I was just thinking about you. Did you get my message? I left you some nice chicken casserole in the fridge. You looked so thin the last time Mom. My voice came out harder than I'd intended. You can't just come into my apartment whenever you want. Silence on the other end. Then, in a smaller voice, I was just trying to help. You didn't ask permission. I'm your mother, Leah. Since when do I need permission to make sure my daughter is eating properly? You work those terrible hours at that job, and I know you're not taking care of yourself. Someone has to. I'm 26 years old. I can take care of myself. Can you? Her voice shifted, taking on an edge. Because your fridge told a different story. Half-empty shelves, expired milk. Stop. The word came out sharp enough to cut. You went through my refrigerator? I was putting the casserole away. I had to make room. My free hand gripped the kitchen counter so hard my knuckles turned white. I need that key back. Another silence. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. You're going to take away my key? You're going to lock your own mother out like I'm some kind of criminal? Mom, please don't. After everything I've done for you. After all the sacrifices your father and I made. After the college tuition. After the years of putting your needs first. After, her voice broke on a sob. Is this how you repay us? By treating me like I'm not even welcome in my own daughter's home? Guilt crashed through me, hot and familiar. This was the dance we'd done my entire life. I set a boundary. She weaponized emotion. But I held firm. I'm not saying you're not welcome. I'm saying you need to call first. You need to ask. You can't just walk in whenever you feel like it. Fine. The word was clipped, cold. Fine, Leah. If that's how you want it. I'll give you back your precious key. I'll meet you tomorrow after you get off work. Will that satisfy you? Yes, thank you. She hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there in my kitchen, in the apartment that no longer felt like mine, and wondered if I'd just won or lost. The casserole sat in my fridge, still warm. I couldn't bring myself to eat it. The next evening, Patricia met me in the building lobby. She was dressed immaculately, as always pressed slacks, a cashmere sweater, a pearls at her throat. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she made sure I noticed. Here. She pressed the key into my palm, her hand lingering over mine. I hope you know how much this hurts me. I'm sorry you're hurt, but I need this boundary. Boundaries. She said the word like it tasted bitter. That's what your generation calls basic ingratitude, I suppose. She turned and walked away before I could respond, her heels clicking against the lobby tile with sharp, angry precision. I held the cold metal in my hand and felt a small surge of victory. I'd done it. I'd taken back control. I had no idea it was just the opening shot. 3 days of relative quiet passed, lulling me into a false sense of security. I'd started to relax, to believe that maybe Patricia would actually respect the boundary I'd set. I should have known better. It was Friday evening when the paranoia crept back in. I was organizing my desk drawer, procrastinating on the market analysis I'd brought home when I decided to put the returned key back onto my spare ring. I pulled out the key Patricia had handed me in the lobby and compared it to my own original key. My stomach dropped. The key she had returned was shiny brass, the edges sharp and clean. My original key, the one I had given her 2 years ago, was worn, the metal dull from use. I grabbed the spare I kept in the junk drawer for emergencies and laid all 3 on the desk. Original, emergency spare. And the returned key. The math didn't work. The key she gave me wasn't the one I gave her. It was a brand new copy. My hands started shaking as the reality crystallized. She hadn't just made a copy recently. She must have kept the original I gave her 2 years ago and gone to a hardware store to cut a duplicate to hand back to me. It was a performance. A calculated move to make me think I had won while she maintained her access. She still had a key to my apartment. I felt sick. The violation was so much deeper than I'd realized. She'd planned this. She'd intentionally deceived me, knowing that I would trust her word. I grabbed my phone and called the first locksmith I could find on Google. 24-hour service, thankfully. The technician arrived 90 minutes later, a tired-looking man in his 50s who'd clearly been called away from his dinner. "Someone you know have a key?" he asked as he worked on the deadbolt. "My mother." He didn't even look up. "Yeah, that's about 70% of my emergency calls. Parents, ex-partners, former roommates. People think a key is love. It's not. It's just a piece of metal." The wisdom of a locksmith at 9 p.m. on a Friday night. I would have laughed if I weren't so angry. The invoice came to $250. New deadbolt, new doorknob lock, 2 new keys for me. I stared at the number and felt my chest tighten. That was my weekend plans, gone. That was groceries for 2 weeks. That was the small buffer between me and my credit card. I handed over my debit card and tried not to think about the instant ramen I'd be eating for the foreseeable future, but I could breathe again. She couldn't get in now. The locks were mine. Except the attack had already shifted to a new front. The text came from Dad on Sunday afternoon. Robert Shepard rarely texted. He preferred to deliver his judgments in person, or via phone call where he could hear you squirm. The fact that he'd resorted to text meant this was calculated. "I spent over $40,000 on your college tuition, not for you to treat your parents like strangers. Don't let the money I worked hard for raise an ungrateful child." I read it 3 times, each pass making my blood pressure spike higher. And $40,000. He'd managed to reduce our entire relationship to a transaction. 4 years of a state university, partially covered by scholarships and my own student loans, plus the portion they'd contributed as parents, all of it weaponized into a guilt bomb designed to detonate my resistance. Another text followed. "Your mother cried for 2 hours after you accused her of being a criminal. Is this who you've become?" I typed and deleted 5 different responses. Everything I wanted to say about boundaries, about respect, about the fact that changing my locks wasn't an accusation, but a necessity, would just be twisted. Used as evidence of my ingratitude, my coldness, my transformation into someone they didn't recognize. So I said nothing. I let the messages sit there, unanswered. But the silence didn't protect me. Patricia started calling. 3 times a day at first, then more. She'd leave voicemails that started sweet, "Just checking in on my baby girl," and ended with barbs, "I guess you're too busy for family now." Robert sent emails to my work account. Professional sounding at first glance, but anyone who read between the lines would see the manipulation. "Hope you're doing well. Mom mentioned you've been stressed. We're always here if you need to talk about what's really going on." What's really going on? As if my need for privacy was a symptom of some deeper problem they needed to diagnose and fix. The calls came during my lunch break, during meetings, during the precious quiet morning hours before work when I tried to center myself for the day ahead. My phone became a weapon pointed at my peace of mind. I started letting everything go to voicemail. I stopped reading the texts immediately, but even that didn't stop the constant buzzing, the notifications stacking up like bills I couldn't afford to pay. Hannah noticed first. We were having coffee on a Wednesday afternoon, a rare break in both our schedules, when she grabbed my phone off the table. "Leah, you have 47 unread messages. 47. "I know. Are they all from?" "Mostly." I took the phone back and silenced it. "Some are from Dad too now." Hannah's expression shifted from concern to anger. "They're tag-teaming you." "It's fine. I changed the locks. They can't actually get in anymore. But they're still getting to you." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "You've lost weight. You look exhausted. When's the last time you slept through the night?" I didn't answer because we both knew the truth. The physical lock on my door had stopped the intrusion into my space, but it had done nothing to stop the psychological siege. If anything, it had escalated. Patricia had moved beyond voicemails. She'd started showing up at my building, not coming upstairs but lingering in the lobby. The first time I saw her there, my heart nearly stopped. She was sitting on the old couch near the mailboxes, looking small and sad and perfectly positioned to intercept me. "I was in the neighborhood," she'd said, as if the West Side was anywhere near her pristine suburban home 40 minutes away. "I thought maybe we could talk. Really talk, without all this anger between us." I'd kept walking, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. "I have plans, Mom." "Plans?" She'd said it like I'd announced I was joining a cult. "You always have plans now. Plans that don't include your family." I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I stopped, if I engaged, she'd pull me back under. That was a week ago. She'd been back twice since then, always just in the neighborhood, always with that wounded expression that made me feel like a monster for wanting space. The harassment via phone continued. The moral pressure mounted. My inbox became a minefield of subject lines like, "We need to talk about your behavior," and "Worried about you," and the particularly devastating, "Where did we go wrong?" I realized, sitting alone in my apartment on a Sunday night with my phone buzzing for the 15th time that day, that I'd been fighting the wrong battle. A physical lock only blocks a door. It doesn't stop the manipulation, the guilt, the constant erosion of your boundaries through sheer persistent pressure. They were teaching me a lesson. You can change the locks, but you can't change the fact that we own you. We paid for your education. We raised you. We have rights to you that no deadbolt can revoke. I looked around my apartment, my safe space that no longer felt safe, and knew something had to give. I couldn't live like this, not for another week, another month, another year of my life. The cost of the new locks had been $250, but the cost of my peace of mind, my sanity, my ability to function as an independent adult, that price was climbing higher every single day. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Patricia. "I made your favorite meatloaf tonight. Remember how you used to help me make it when you were little? I miss those days. I miss my daughter." I stared at those words, "I miss my daughter," and felt something harden inside me. She didn't miss me. She missed the version of me that never said no, never questioned, never demanded to be treated like an adult with rights to privacy and boundaries. That version of me was gone. And I was starting to realize that no amount of explaining, no amount of reasonable conversation, no amount of hoping they'd understand, was going to make them accept that. The lock on my door was just the beginning. I'd stopped them from physically entering my space, but they were still camped out in my head, in my phone, in my emotional landscape. I needed a bigger weapon. I just didn't know yet what that weapon would be. The fragile silence lasted exactly 2 weeks. That's how long it took for my mother to test me again. I should have known the peace wouldn't last. And what I didn't anticipate was that Patricia Shepard doesn't accept shields. She dismantles them. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I was at my desk, halfway through a presentation deck for a client meeting, when I saw the 312 area code flash across my screen. "This is Leah." I answered, professional and clipped. "Miss Shepard, this is Mark Ellison, building manager at Westside Towers." His voice was cold, stripped of any warmth or courtesy. My stomach dropped. "We've had an incident in the lobby involving a woman claiming to be your mother." The world tilted sideways. "What kind of incident?" I managed, though I already knew. Deep down, I'd always known it would come to this. "The police are here, Miss Shepard. I think you need to know what happened." 20 minutes earlier, according to Mark's account, my mother had walked into the building lobby with her usual confidence, the kind that comes from never being told no. She'd marched straight to the elevator bank, pulled out her old key, and inserted it into the call button panel. Nothing. She'd tried again. And again. The key that had granted her unauthorized access for months was now just a useless piece of metal. That's when she'd pivoted to the reception desk. "I need you to let me into my daughter's apartment," she'd announced to Marcus, the security guard who'd been on duty. Not asked. Announced. Marcus, to his credit, had followed protocol. "Ma'am, I'll need to see your ID and confirm you're on the approved visitor list." "I don't need to be on a list. I'm her mother." The way Mark described it, her voice had already started rising, that sharp edge I knew so well creeping in. "She's sick. She needs me." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your name isn't on the lease. and Miss Shepherd specifically requested that we not grant you access without her direct approval. And that's when Patricia Shepherd changed tactics. She didn't get violent, Leah. That would have been easier to handle. Mark's voice was tight over the phone. She stood right in the center of the lobby, tears streaming down her face, and started grabbing the sleeves of residents trying to pass by. She told them, "You were being held against your will." She told them you were suffering from a breakdown and we were stopping a mother from saving her child. I squeezed my eyes shut, a wave of nausea rolling over me. It was so perfectly calculated. When Marcus asked her to step back, Mark continued. She sat down. Right there on the marble floor in front of the elevators, she screamed, "I'm not going anywhere. Call the police. Let them see how you treat a worried mother." She had caused a scene, clogging the entryway, creating a spectacle that had residents pulling out their phones to record. She had weaponized the pity of strangers against the building's security protocols. The police had to intervene not because she was violent, but because she refused to comply with a criminal trespass order and was causing a civil disturbance. Mark finished. She forced our hand. By the time the officers arrived, my mother had fully committed to the role of the victim. She'd wept to the officers, showing them her old key as proof of her rights, begging them to force the building to let her in, but Marcus had his instructions. And Mark Ellison had the lease with only my name on it, and the police had a woman creating a disturbance on private property who refused to leave. They'd filed a report. Official. On record. Case number and everything. Then they'd ordered her to leave and not return. "Miss Shepherd." Mark's voice cut through my horrified silence. "I need to be clear about something. This building has a reputation to maintain. We have elderly residents, families with children, and we cannot have this kind of theatrical disturbance happening in our lobby." "I understand," I whispered, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles went white. "I'm so sorry." "If this happens again," he continued, and his tone was ice, "we will be forced to terminate your lease early. And I want you to understand what that means. It will go on your rental history. Your credit score will take a hit. Every landlord you apply with in the future will see that you were evicted for cause." My vision blurred. In America, your credit score isn't just a number, it's your second life. It determines whether you can rent an apartment, buy a car, sometimes even get a job. And rental history? That's the difference between having a home and being denied at every application. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and my mother's hands were on my back. "It won't happen again," I said, and I meant it with every cell in my body. "I promise you, Mr. Ellison, it won't." "See that it doesn't." He hung up. I sat there at my desk, surrounded by the mundane trappings of corporate life, coffee cups and spreadsheets and motivational posters, and felt something crack open inside my chest. That evening, I called Hannah and Maya. We met at Maya's apartment, a cozy studio that smelled like vanilla candles and safety. I told them everything. The lobby, the police, the threat to my lease. The way my mother had weaponized her own performance to try to force her way back into my life. "She's going to ruin me," I said, and my voice broke. "She's going to destroy my credit, my rental history, everything I've worked for, and she doesn't even care. She'll burn my whole life down just to prove she can still control me." Hannah, who'd known my family since college, leaned forward and took my hands. Her eyes were fierce. "Leah, listen to me. They don't love you. They want to own you." "Hannah's right," Maya added softly. "Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't sit on a lobby floor screaming lies to strangers. This is possession. This is control." "But she's my mother." "And you're a grown woman with rights," Hannah interrupted. "You've tried boundaries. You've tried talking. You've tried everything reasonable." She responded by forcing the police to get involved. "What else does she have to do before you accept that she's not going to stop?" I looked at my two best friends, the only family I'd chosen for myself, and felt something shift. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was clarity. "What do I do?" I asked. "You protect yourself," Maya said firmly. "You get a lawyer. You file a restraining order. You make it legal, official, and documented. You make it so that if she tries this again, there are consequences that actually matter." Hannah nodded. "You've been fighting with one hand tied behind your back because you still thought appealing to her better nature would work, but she doesn't have one. Not when it comes to you." They were right. I'd been clinging to the fantasy that somewhere inside Patricia Shepard was a mother who would wake up and see what she was doing to me, but that mother, if she'd ever existed, was gone. I pulled out my phone and looked at the text thread from my father. The one where he'd demanded repayment for my tuition. The one where he'd called me selfish and ungrateful. Then I opened my photos and pulled up the screenshot I'd taken of Mark Ellison's number. "I need a copy of that police report," I said aloud. Maya raised her eyebrows. "Why?" "Why?" "Because I'm not asking nicely anymore," I replied. "I'm going to court. Radio silence is a weapon, and I wielded it like a blade. For 48 hours after the lobby incident, my phone became a battlefield I refused to enter. My mother's texts poured in, dozens of them, each one a carefully crafted missile designed to hit a different emotional target. "I can't believe you called the police on your own mother. We raised you better than this. Everyone is asking what we did wrong. Do you know how humiliating this is? Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. If something happens to him, it's on you." My father's texts were worse because they came wrapped in the language of finance and obligation. "We are willing to forgive the $40,000 if you apologize and give us back the key. This is your last chance to make this right before we take legal action. You're throwing away your family over a door lock. Think about what you're doing." I didn't respond. Not once. Each text went unanswered, each voicemail unplayed. I didn't block them, not yet, because every message was evidence. Every threat, every guilt trip, every manipulation was another brick in the case I was building. They thought my silence was fear. They thought I was cowering, preparing to surrender. They had no idea I was preparing for war. On Thursday morning, I walked into my bank and withdrew $300 from my emergency fund. The teller counted out the bills with mechanical efficiency, oblivious to the fact that she was handing me ammunition. $300. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't much. But it was enough to file court paperwork, enough to make my boundaries legally enforceable, enough to finally make them stop. From the bank, I drove to the Westside Towers office. Mark Ellison looked up from his computer with barely concealed wariness when I knocked. "Miss Shepard." "Mr. Ellison, I need a copy of the police report from my mother's incident." I kept my voice steady. "Professional. For legal purposes." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I can get you that. Give me 10 minutes." When he returned, he handed me 3 stapled pages, the official Chicago Police Department incident report, complete with case number, officer names, and witness statements. Marcus's account of my mother's behavior was damning in its clinical precision. Subject created a civil disturbance by impeding resident access and refusing to vacate the premises. Subject made false claims regarding resident welfare to incite bystander intervention. Subject refused multiple requests to leave private property. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Miss Shepard," Mark said as I turned to leave. "I hope you're handling this." "I am," I replied. "I promise you, I am." Later that day, the Cook County District Court building was imposing in the way government architecture always is, all concrete and authority, designed to make you feel small. I clutched my folder of evidence and walked through the metal detectors with my head high. The clerk's office was on the 3rd floor. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and efficient hands. Her nameplate read, Dana Whitmore. "I need to file for a restraining order," I said. Dana didn't even blink. She'd probably heard that sentence 1,000 times. "Temporary or permanent?" "Temporary. For now." She slid a form across the desk. "Fill this out. Be specific about dates, times, and incidents. If you have documentation, that helps." I sat in one of the plastic chairs bolted to the floor and began writing. Everything spilled out onto the page: the unauthorized key, the intrusion into my home, the changed locks, the lobby breakdown, the police report. I made sure to emphasize the specific legal language I had researched the night before. That my mother's escalating behavior constituted a credible threat of imminent harm to my mental well-being and housing security. I attached the printouts of my parents' text messages that I'd prepared at the office earlier. When I brought the completed petition back to Dana, she read through it with practiced efficiency. Her expression never changed, but when she reached the police report, she paused. "This is good documentation," she said, looking up at me. "Most people don't have this." I learned fast. I replied. She stamped the papers, processed my $300 payment, and handed me a receipt. Judge Ramirez is fair when it comes to these disputes. You cannot lose this case. Don't worry. Thank you. I took the papers with trembling hands. Thank you so much. Dana's expression softened just slightly. You're doing the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. From the courthouse, I went back to see Mark Ellison. This time, I came armed. Mr. Ellison, I filed for a restraining order today. I placed the copies on his desk, the TRO petition, the police report, the court receipt. I want you to know I'm taking this seriously. He picked up the documents, reading carefully. This is good. This is very good. There's something else, I continued, my heart pounding. I need to break my lease early. His expression clouded. Miss Shepard, you're aware there's a penalty. Section 14.3 of the Illinois Safe Homes Act, I interrupted. Tenants who are victims of stalking or harassment with documented police reports are allowed to terminate their lease without penalty if they face a credible threat of imminent harm on the premises. I have the police report. I have the restraining order petition. I qualify. Mark stared at me for a long moment, then down at the paperwork. I watched him piece it together, the liability risk of keeping me here, the continued threat of my mother showing up and causing more theatrical scenes, the legal protection I was invoking. Finally, he nodded. When do you want to be out? End of next week, if possible. I'll waive the penalty, he said, but you need to be out by the 31st. And Miss Shepard? You're making the smart choice. No. I walked out of that office with my head spinning. The lease break penalty would have been over $2,000 money I didn't have, money that would have trapped me in place. Instead, I just saved every penny. Money I could now use for a deposit on a new apartment. Money I could use to disappear. My phone buzzed. Another text from my mother. We're coming over next Saturday to talk about this face-to-face. We'll bring lunch. Your favorite? Meatloaf. I looked at the message and felt nothing but cold determination. Come next Saturday. I won't be here. And by the time they realized what I'd done, it would be too late. 5 days later, I learned that the price of freedom is often comfort. I signed the lease on Tuesday afternoon next week. The new studio in the Riverside Towers was safer, undeniably doorman, key fobs, cameras everywhere, but it was suffocatingly small. It was the only unit I could afford that offered the level of security I needed. My budget was shattered. The $300 for the court filing, the deposit, the first month's rent, it had drained me dry. I stood in my old apartment on Friday night, staring at my beloved sectional couch. It was the first nice thing I'd ever bought for myself. It wouldn't fit in the new elevator. Even if it did, it wouldn't fit in the new apartment. We have to leave it, I told Hannah, my voice hollow. We can try to pivot it. We can't, and I can't afford a bigger truck or a storage unit. So we dragged it down to the curb. I watched a scavenger pick it up 20 minutes later. That night, in my new, secure fortress of an apartment, I slept on a mattress thrown directly onto the bare floor. I ate instant ramen because I had exactly $30 left in my checking account to last me until payday. My back ached, my stomach growled, and the room was so small I could touch opposite walls if I stretched. But for the first time in 26 years, I slept without dreaming of someone breaking in. I slid the keys to the old place into the after-hours drop box at the management office at 2 a.m. Mark Ellison would find them the next morning, along with my forwarding address form which listed Hannah's place as my mailing address, not my actual new location. Another layer of protection. Another wall between me and them. Done? Hannah asked as I climbed back into the van. Done, I confirmed. Maya started the engine. Then let's get you home. Patricia and Robert drove to my old apartment on Saturday afternoon. I know this because Hannah, who'd been watching my old building from a coffee shop across the street, yes, we'd gone full surveillance mode, texted me at 3:47 p.m. They're here. Your mom's wearing a cream cardigan and carrying a casserole dish. Your dad looks annoyed. I imagined the scene. Patricia, armed with comfort food and crocodile tears, planning her intervention. Robert, probably rehearsing his speech about responsibility and debt and how I was being dramatic. Both of them convinced that I was cowering inside, too weak to maintain my boundaries, ready to crumble the moment they applied enough pressure. They'd knock on the door. No answer. They'd knock again. Harder. Still nothing. Patricia would press her ear to the door, listening for movement. Silence. Eventually, they'd find Mark Ellison. He'd check his records, his expression neutral and professional. Miss Shepherd terminated her lease. She moved out earlier this week. No, I don't have a forwarding address beyond her friend's P.O. box. No, I can't give you that information. Privacy policy. Hannah sent another text at 4:23 p.m. They just left. Your mom looked furious. Your dad was yelling at her in the parking lot. I stared at my phone, waiting. It rang at 4:31 p.m. Mother's cell flashed on the screen. I'd blocked their numbers days ago. But I'd known they'd find a way around it, eventually borrowed phones, new numbers, whatever it took. So I'd set up a separate Google Voice number and given it to exactly 3 people: Mark Ellison, my HR department, and the court. That number forwarded to my real phone, but with a special ringtone. This call was coming through that line. Which meant they'd either charmed my old building manager into giving it up or found it on some forgotten form. I answered on the 4th ring. Hello? Where are you? Patricia's voice was ice wrapped in fury. What have you done? I've moved, I said calmly, sitting cross-legged on my mattress on the floor. As is my legal right, as an adult, with my own lease. You can't just disappear. I can, actually, and I have. Robert's voice cut in speakerphone then. Leah, this is ridiculous. We drove all the way over there to talk to you, and you're gone? What kind of daughter? The kind who files police reports, I interrupted. The kind who documents harassment. The kind who takes legal action when her parents refuse to respect basic boundaries. Silence. Then, legal action? I took a breath, savoring the moment. The petition for a restraining order was accepted by the court based on the police report from last week. The judge reviewed the evidence, the break-in, the trespassing, the harassment, all of it. The papers will be served. You're bluffing, but Patricia's voice shook. Am I? I guess you'll find out when the process server shows up. I hung up. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. I felt powerful in a way I'd never experienced before. Not the cruel power of dominance, but the quiet power of self-protection. The power of boundaries enforced not by hope or guilt, but by law. Evan Brooks was waiting in their driveway when they got home that day. Hannah had given me his name. Her cousin worked at a legal firm that used him regularly. He's the best, she'd promised. Professional, persistent, and he doesn't take nonsense from anyone. I'd paid him $200 from my already strained emergency fund, worth every penny. According to Evan's text sent at 6:02 p.m., Patricia and Robert pulled into their driveway at 5:58 p.m., still arguing. He'd approached the driver's side window before Robert even turned off the engine. Robert Shepherd? Patricia Shepherd? You've been served. He handed them the thick manila envelope through the car window. Inside, the temporary restraining order, the court date, the police report, copies of Patricia's texts, photos of my apartment after her intrusion, a detailed timeline of harassment. Everything documented, everything undeniable. Evan texted me a photo. My parents' faces visible through the windshield, pale and shocked, the envelope open in Robert's lap. Job done. They looked like they'd seen a ghost. Nice work, Miss Shepherd. I stared at that photo for a long time, my mother's mouth open in apparent protest. My father's hand frozen mid-gesture, a legal document he couldn't bully or guilt his way out of spread across his knees. They hadn't just lost control of me. They were facing consequences. Real ones. The kind that came with court dates and legal restrictions and public records. I saved the photo, then deleted it. I didn't need a trophy. I had something better. Freedom. By the time the seasons shifted 3 months later, the necessary coldness had set in, and my life had transformed completely. There were no tearful reconciliation coffees. No dramatic confrontations in parking lots. No surprise visits or ambush dinners. The temporary restraining order became a permanent one after a brief court hearing where Judge Ramirez reviewed the evidence, listened to Patricia's lawyer claim it was all a misunderstanding between family, and then stated flatly, weaponizing a building's security staff and creating a civil disturbance to gain access to an adult's home isn't a misunderstanding. It's harassment. Order granted for 1 year, renewable if violations occur. My life now existed behind a wall of professional security. The doorman at Riverside Towers, Marcus, a retired Marine with a warm smile and zero tolerance for nonsense, knew my face, knew my schedule, knew that absolutely no one came upstairs without my explicit approval. "Your parents?" he'd asked during my first week, after Patricia had somehow found my new building and tried to sweet-talk her way past the desk. "Especially not my parents," I'd confirmed. He'd nodded once. "Understood. Consider it handled." She'd tried twice more. Both times, Marcus had politely but firmly directed her to leave the property, or he'd call the police. Both times, she'd left. The third time he did call the police. She hadn't come back after that. My finances were still recovering. The move had drained my emergency fund despite the waived lease termination fee, security deposit, first month's rent, moving truck, Evans fee, and the painfully slow process of buying new furniture to replace what hadn't fit. My checking account looked anemic, my savings nearly depleted. I was still eating cheap meals, but they tasted better in a home that was truly mine. But I felt wealthy in ways that had nothing to do with bank balances. I felt wealthy when I came home to an apartment that hadn't been invaded. Wealthy when my phone rang and I didn't experience a spike of anxiety. Wealthy when I made plans without calculating whether they'd be interrupted by a surprise visit. Hannah and Maya had become my chosen family, the sisters I'd picked rather than inherited. We had dinner every Wednesday, a standing tradition, sacred and unbreakable. They'd been there for every moment of my escape, every small victory, every setback. "You seem different," Maya observed one evening, gesturing at me with her wine glass. "Lighter, somehow." "I am lighter," I agreed. "I'm not carrying their expectations anymore." Hannah raised her glass. "To boundaries. May they be high, strong, and equipped with security cameras." We drank to that. Work had become easier too. My boss had noticed the change in my demeanor during my annual review. "Your performance has improved significantly over the last quarter," she'd said, reviewing my metrics. "More focused, more confident in your presentations. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I'd smiled. Just some personal changes. Better work-life balance. What I didn't say: it's amazing how much energy you have for your actual life when you're not constantly defending yourself from invasion. My marketing campaigns had gotten sharper, more creative. I'd pitched 3 new ideas in the last month alone, 2 had been approved for implementation. My salary was still $55,000, but I'd been told a raise was likely during the next review cycle. I was building something, not just recovering from something, but actively building a life that was mine, shaped by my choices, protected by boundaries I'd fought for. One evening in late May, I sat on my small balcony, barely large enough for a chair and a potted plant, but mine, watching the Chicago skyline turn gold in the sunset. My phone was on the table beside me, silent. I'd gotten used to the silence. It had been terrifying at first. The absence of constant contact, constant demands, constant crisis. Now it felt like peace. The phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I almost didn't open it. But something, curiosity, maybe, or just the confidence that came from knowing I was safe, made me tap the notification. The message appeared. "Mom cooked the meatloaf you like. Dad says he'll forgive the money issue if you come home for dinner. We miss you." I stared at the words, analyzing them like a marketing strategy, which in a way they were. Marketing designed to sell me on the idea that I was still the daughter they could control. The meatloaf. Emotional manipulation. The comfort food of my childhood, weaponized to trigger nostalgia and longing. Dad's forgiveness. Financial pressure. The imaginary $40,000 debt, dangled like a carrot, the implicit threat that I still owed them, still needed their approval. "We miss you." The guilt trip. Not "we love you" or "we were wrong," just the simple implication that my absence was causing them pain, and therefore I was responsible for fixing it. I'd read enough psychology articles over the last 3 months to recognize the pattern. This was hoovering the attempt to suck me back into the cycle by any means necessary. When aggression failed, they pivoted to nostalgia. When commands didn't work, they tried bargaining. Classic narcissistic playbook. I felt something looking at that message. Not guilt that surprised me. Not longing or sadness or regret. I felt pity. And beneath the pity, a vast, cool indifference. Pity for 2 people so unable to accept reality that they were still trying the same tactics, still convinced that the right combination of emotional buttons would make me fold. Pity for the desperation behind a burner phone and a dinner invitation wrapped in manipulation and indifference, because their actions no longer held the power to hurt me. They couldn't see me as a person, only as a role they needed filled. Dutiful daughter, permanent child, emotional support system. I would never be that again. I tapped the number at the top of the screen. The options menu appeared. My thumb hovered over block caller for just a moment, not from hesitation but from acknowledgement. This was it. The final door closing. The last thread cut. I pressed it. The screen confirmed. Caller blocked. I set the phone down and looked back at the skyline. The city glittered in the growing darkness. 1,000 lights in 1,000 windows, each one representing someone living their own life, fighting their own battles, building their own peace. In the absolute silence of my balcony, with the city humming below and the stars beginning to appear above, I smiled. I was safe, and I was free.